Good day, everyone. I'm Jim Sinner from the Cawthron Institute, and I'm going to talk to you today. I've been asked to tell you about a project that we are doing funded by what was called the Cross-Departmental Research Pool, which is a funding mechanism from what was formerly the Foundation for Research, Science, Technology, and the mechanism no longer exists. This is the last project that was funded through that mechanism, sponsored by a number of different departments trying to get some better understanding around some of the issues around market-based instruments for freshwater management. Project led by MAF, but also with support and contributions from a number of other departments. So I'm reporting on behalf of a team, lots of different people involved: Landcare Research, Motu, Aqualink, Simon Harris, and Hannah Krengle, who are independent as well. So the first point is this one. Limits on abstractions and discharges of fresh water are coming to a catchment near you. Out of the freshwater NPS, there's a couple of quite directive policies that make it pretty clear to regional councils that government is directing them to set limits for every freshwater body in the country. And I want to just observe, with respect to a question that Steve Markham asked before lunch about all these different knowledge sets and databases and things we need to know for these lessons to be portable. And the point I want to make is that the setting of limits and all of the technical and economic and political challenges that represents is a fundamentally different question than the mechanism for which, within which we're going to operate. So managing within limits is a different, and how we do that is a different question than setting the limits. And I think most of the data sets and knowledge bases that Steve was referring to are about setting the limit and not so much about how we manage within the limits. Whether you want to have, and how portable these systems are in terms of tradable nutrient permits or something else, the knowledge you need to know then is how much does attenuation and environmental effect vary over space? So how much does it matter whether you are emitting something here or over here? That knowledge is important if you're going to pick up a tradable regime and transfer it from this catchment to that catchment. But a lot of the questions about setting limits are fundamentally a different set of questions. I think that there will be variations from one catchment to another in terms of transferable permit regimes, but those are, I think, not as highly variable as some of the other things one has to consider when setting limits. Okay. So what are some of the issues and what are some of the reasons we look at some market-based instruments, and why was the project set up? Well, there's questions of allocation and reallocation, as we've talked about. Reallocation is about how you adapt over time to changing technology, changing prices, changing values. And within that, we've got questions of what are the limits and how do you make sure you achieve the limit and not be undermined by compliance issues or other things that don't quite work. You want efficient use of resources, and you want to deal with equity and social questions as well, which Susie has touched on. So you've got issues of transferability that help you to, or you think about in terms of those allocation issues. The project requirements also asked us to look at issues around revenue mechanisms. Another market-based instrument with some different purposes. You might want to be collecting revenue for water management. You might want to be collecting revenue for mitigation, rehabilitation. You might want to be doing it for treaty settlement purposes, maybe simply for return to the community for what is, as been said, a public utility. You could also use pricing mechanisms to try to achieve your efficiency outcomes, although that's not something that I would necessarily recommend in this context of water quality, for reasons I won't go into today. So MAF and the other departments asked us to assess how these market-based instruments can help us to manage within limits, and again to look at transferable permits, both for water allocation and for discharges, and to look at water charges and possibly some auction mechanisms for both quality and quantity. And they wanted us to report on feasibility, elements of good design, issues of implementation and transition, and community attitudes around market-based instruments. Just a few minor things to talk about. And essentially what we're trying to do is understand some of the perceptions around market-based instruments and how we can inform both the local discussion and a national discussion about ways to respond to some of these perceptions. And it's not really a question of whether the perceptions are right or wrong, but a way of engendering discussion around these issues to see ways through them. I'm not going to read all these, and some of those perceptions I would agree with, and some of them I would disagree with. That's not really the point. It's really a platform to discuss and explore those perceptions with a group of stakeholders. So we've got two case studies, one in Hawke's Bay, which is looking at water quantity issues only, and one in the Upper Waikato, which is both a water quality and a water quantity case study. So because this is a water quality forum, I'm just going to talk about the Upper Waikato case study. Oops. And for this, this particular project, what we're doing is we are setting up very simplified hypothetical models of a catchment and then creating some hypothetical properties and businesses within that catchment. We're getting a group of stakeholders to come together, giving each one of them one of these entities to manage within a simulation context, and we're then putting them through a series of policy scenarios where we say, okay, now we're going to have tradable water permits, tradable nutrient permits, and change some of the settings and use that as a platform for discussion. So in the Upper Waikato case study, we've simplified the Upper Waikato catchment into two hydro lake catchments, 2 dams. The lower one has a pulp mill and a district council, both of which take and discharge water into tributaries of the Waikato River. We're treating those catchments as, I guess, uniform in terms of spatial location of where discharges take place. Doesn't matter whether you're on a tributary or on the main stem or in the lake. If you're within one of those catchments, we are treating you as having an effect on the lake. And that is on the basis of what the regional council has told us is the way they manage that catchment. So they're looking really at the lake as the sensitive receiving body, and at least for the time being, they're not too focused on impacts on any particular tributary. That may come later, but that's not the current focus.